All right, so I've brought my sketch into Illustrator. I have it on a locked layer at the bottom, so it's protected. And I'm now working on layers on the top. It's very important to use layers within Illustrator just to keep things organized. And I showed really briefly how the pen tool can give me exact control of curves. But just to remind you about Illustrator's features, it's like the shape tools we used in our second exercise, the shape-based composition exercise in Photoshop. Once we have the shape, we can select the color. And in this case, we're going to be designing as just black fills. And we don't want to have a stroke outline. So I'm going to have, in this little indicator of Illustrator's fill and stroke, I want to have a black fill, like it's a black cutout of paper with no outline. And if I swap those, that would be what I had before, with no opening, with no fill on the inside, which looks like this, so you can see the gray through it, but just a black outline, like that. So I want to swap that. So I have the fill, but no outline. Okay, now, unlike the way we worked in Photoshop, where we were then able to transform the shapes we made and make them whatever we want, in Illustrator, we might need to redraw them or shape them to what we want. So if I delete that and now I'm going to draw right over my wing, I can start with the pen tool and plot anchors and start to curve it. And plot anchors. The biggest benefit of the pen tool is it creates very few anchors because you have to decide everywhere you want one. And then you can modify them after the fact. You see how my curve is reversed there? I'll be able to fix that. First, I need to plot an anchor. And it's going to fill as I go. So sometimes the fill will make sense and sometimes it won't. And I'm not going to go too far before I close my path. I might go maybe to here. And then start curving it again, even though I know this is in the wrong place. Because it's like cutting out paper with magic scissors. The whole point is I want to get back to my original anchor point, which will close the path for me. So you see as my pen goes over the first anchor I put down, I get a circle next to it. And that means if I click there, it will close the path. Great, so I have my layers visible. I can turn that off and on. And now I can adjust it. So this is the most exacting way to work in Illustrator, where you have a lot of options under the pen tool. I can delete anchor points, I can convert them, I can add them. So in order to do that, I need to select paths. And while you're using, let's say, the Convert Anchor Point tool, you can hold down Command to get the large selection tool. And then when you click on an anchor point, you can turn it into a curve if you want to, or you can move the handles on either side of the handle and adjust that curve. So for instance, I want a shallower curve here, so I need to select the anchor. Whoops. And work with those curves individually to be what I want. So I want this one to be a little higher. I want the other one to be a little shallower. Then here, convert that anchor point. Bring this all the way in so that hook remains clean. I could probably make this cleaner by getting rid of an anchor point, and I can hold down minus to do that, just to delete one. And then that allows me with the small selection tool just to play with these handles. You don't need to do it only with the Convert Anchor Point tool. And with that tool, I can also move the anchor points wherever I want, so I can get better curves. that's about what I want for the top there. Now for the bottom, let's see, do I want it really sharp? Maybe not, so I might want to add an anchor point. Plus is the shortcut for that. And then use the small selection tool to move that anchor down. And then if I need to convert it, so you're seeing all the steps here that are possible. I can make it into a curve. And I'm liking that a little bit more. Then if I want to move it all, I can take each point, work with it, move it up or down along the line, like magic scissors. I want it a little thicker on this end. I can open up that curve a little bit on that end. And if I really want to control that curve, I can use the convert anchor point tool to play with those curves even more on both sides. So the convert anchor point tool is the only one that allows you to take the curves differently in both directions. So here, I can bend it one way there and another way here, which makes it a very useful tool. All right, so that is the oldest tool in Illustrator, the pen tool. But notice, even when you're really exacting, you can get little bumps. And so the other tool I like to use a lot, probably more than any other, is the pencil tool, which is under the brush, under what's called the shaper tool. And the shaper tool is new, and I'll be honest that I don't know much about it. So I will take it upon myself to learn, because I'm sure it has some great things. But with the pencil tool, if I select the whole, then I can just redraw certain parts of it to fit my design. So if you feel more like just drawing your thing outright, put a shape down, and then you can refine it with the pencil tool. The problem with that is it's going to add more anchor points than you might want. And in order to get it to redraw, you have to go through an anchor point and end through an anchor point, like so. You see how I added all of those? So what I like to do is double click on the pencil tool, set it all the way to smooth, and then unless you're really shaky, it will kind of minimize those anchors. But when you need really clean design, like I kind of need for these wings, if you can do it with the pen tool, individual anchors and handles, you'll be happier, more empowered. All right. So now that I've got one outside wing, that's a shape I want to keep. And so what I'm going to do is save it at this point. Just File, Save. Save it to the desktop as an AI file, because I'm still working on it. So that's an Illustrator file. All the defaults turned on. Now I'm going to make a duplicate of this. So if you want symmetry, you don't draw everything by hand. You draw one side and then you flip it and copy it to the other. So let me select it. Then I'm going to go to Edit, or I can use Command-C, Copy. And then I'm going to say Edit, Paste in Place. And then I hold down Shift and I move it over. And then, let's see, I know how I can flip it, but I was wondering if there's a way I can flip it perfectly. Yes, I believe there is. So if I do Object, Transform, and then Reflect, and I want a vertical axis reflection at 90 degrees, it will flip it exactly. The other way you can flip it unexactly is just to take this and move it across itself, like so. But then you might make it too big or too wide or something. All right, now with the arrow keys, because it's all selected, I can move it right into place where I think it should go. And ideally, it wouldn't travel up or down. And that looks pretty good. I want it right on the outside of that, and I want this one to overlap it. Okay, so here's the thing about Illustrator. I've done my first logo parts. right? They're looking pretty clean, pretty good. Underneath each layer you make, Illustrator automatically records each path. Each closed path is its own component. So I could go and make modifications to one without affecting the other, and I can lock each path as I'm sure of it, right? So that's how I like to use layers to help organize. Now that I'm happy with those wings, I'm going to go to another part. And I might go to a part that uses a different tool that's not solid shape so much. Instead, it's this crown, which, like my reference, which I have on my desktop, let's see, right here, the Rosenthal crown, back here, is open in design. And it's actually a vector. So let me show you a new technique for that, and I'm going to do that on a new layer. So I've locked these layers, and I'm bringing in another layer, and now I'm going to simply drag and drop my reference for the Rosenthal crown into Illustrator. I didn't want to show you this too early because I don't want you to rely too much on this. But Illustrator is able to take a raster image because my reference image was a JPEG. See? If I open this up in preview as a JPEG and I zoom in, you'll see the pixels. It's a pretty low resolution online image, right? And it can trace it into a vector for you. So some logo designers, and sometimes I'll do this, especially if it's a really complicated logo, I'll do everything by hand, and then I'll ink it on tracing paper beautifully by hand, scan that, clean it up in Photoshop so it's as perfect a raster version of the logo as possible. And then I'll do this trick to make it into a vector. And black and white is by far the easiest way to do this. So what do? As soon as you bring any raster file, it even did this with your sketch, but we didn't take advantage of it. Any raster file into Illustrator, it makes a big X across it, and it opens up what are called the image trace options at the top. So now, instead of going off of this layer and making a new layer like I did for my sketch, I'm going to use the image trace options. I'm going to do the drop-down menu, and I'm going to pick black and white logo. Black and white logo will only allow solid paths of white or black. Then I'm going to go to the options here, the image trace panel options. And I don't want white shapes. I just want black shapes. So I go to advanced, and I say under options, ignore white. So now you see it makes the white of that JPEG transparent. It's no longer going to trace those shapes. Now I can kind of zoom in, shortcut Command plus, and it's previewing it for me. That looks like a pretty clean vector, just with the default settings for black and white logo, and that makes sense. But if I wanted to tweak it, if I wanted to add more paths, I could see that widens it out. If I wanted to allow it to be darker, I could be less tolerant of it, of gray pixels, or if I want it to be thinner, I could be less tolerant. Less tolerant will make your black lines thinner, more tolerant will make them thicker. So you decide on the boldness you want. I want it to feel symmetrical. Right? You can play with how many corners you allow. This is a pretty tight design, but I want clean corners. I don't want everything really rounded. But then little things might not be exactly right. Like that little divot there, let's see if I can get rid of that, while still having nice sharp edges here. I like the rounded edges on the outside. And then noise. This shouldn't have much noise in it at all, but this would be like little debris from the vector. I want the noise in the middle there, otherwise it will punch that hole out. But maybe not all the other little factors. So this is all previewing it. When I like it, and I like the way it looks, and I'm just trying to use the crown right now, then you hit expand on the top. And expand will turn it all into a vector, and you can see all the anchors. Now the problem with doing that is that makes it a custom set with every little component as its own thing. So there's the R, there's the crown,